So every week, Jews all around the world participate in this thing called the Torah reading cycle. Now, what exactly is this? Essentially, the Torah reading cycle is going over the first five books that we read in the Bible: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. That specifically is called the Torah. Now, we have the Torah, we have the Ketuvim, and we have the Nevi'im, the T and K. Right, so we will call that the Tanakh. That is essentially the Old Testament. So the Torah, the first five books, is the Torah of the Tanakh right there. So we will go over what exactly the Torah reading cycle is, how it's performed, and how Yeshua himself, Jesus the Messiah, also participated in this act. So, in the synagogue, we read the Torah annually over the course of a year of a series of subsequent public readings. And this is what it says in Acts 15:21. For Moses from ancient generations has in every city those who preach him, since he is read in the synagogues every Shabbat or Sabbath. Now, when God brought the Jewish people back from the Babylonian captivity, Ezra and Nehemiah were the men of their generations who said to were creating a system to encourage Torah study. They wanted to ensure that the people would not slip into idolatry again. They created the synagogue system in which people heard the Torah read every week. To this day, the Jewish world studies a portion of the Torah every Shabbat or Sabbath. Jews read the Torah out loud in synagogues on Sabbaths, Mondays, and Thursdays. Mondays and Thursdays are the ancient market days. When the market brought the rural people into town, they had an opportunity to hear the Torah. On Sabbath day, the people assembled according to the commandment. And this was so important to the people during the market at the time because Jews knew that there were going to be Gentiles, ones who would come in, as it is prophesied from the prophets. So it was important for not only the Jews at the time, but all of the nations to hear the Torah. So, since the days of the apostles, the Torah continues to be read every week in the same manner. An annual lectionary, the Torah reading cycle, allows all Israel to study the same passages of Scripture simultaneously as they work through the Torah from week to week. The lectionary divides the Torah into 2 to 6 chapters readings for each week. Corresponding readings from the prophets are tackled into the weekly Torah readings. The Torah reading cycle begins the fall after Sukkot with Genesis 1:1. Approximately 12 months later concludes with the end of Deuteronomy. Reading along with the weekly Torah readings is a great way to study through the Torah every year. When you do, you are studying in the synchronization with all of Israel. Synagogues and study halls and messianic congregations all over the world are studying the same passages of Scripture along with you. Now, the synagogue reading schedule divides the Torah into 54 readings. Each reading is called a parashah, which means portion. The names of the weekly portions are derived from a significant Hebrew word in the first sentence of that week's readings. Now, in the days of the apostles, the Bible was not divided into chapters and verses. People indicated different scriptures by referencing to the first word of the phrase of a passage. For example, if a rabbi said, in the place where it says, after the death of Aaron's 2 sons, he would be referring to Parashat Archei Mot from Leviticus 16:1 through 18:30. Now, Archei Mot means after the death of. Similarly, each book of the Torah is named after its opening parashah. So here we have Genesis, which in Hebrew is Bereshit, which means in the beginning. Then we have Exodus, which is Shemot, which means names. Leviticus, which is Vaikra, and he called. Numbers and Bamidbar in the wilderness, and Deuteronomy, which is Devarim or the words. Now, in addition to the weekly portion from the Torah, the synagogue reading schedule prescribes a short reading from the prophets. The reading from the prophets is called the Haftorah reading. The Haftorah, the Hafarot, which is in the plural form, are sections from the books of the prophets that the sages chose to accompany the weekly Torah portions. Each of the 54 Torah portions have an accompanying Haftorah portion. The synagogue election designates additional Haftorah portions for special Shabbats, festivals, and feast days, resulting in more than 80 Haftorah portions over the course of a year. Now, the early synagogues served as places of public prayer and public reading of scripture. Aside from the prayer services, the core of the ancient synagogues, Sabbath service held one, a reading from the Torah, two, a complementary reading from the prophets, and three, a teaching or a darash that expounded upon the two readings. The reading from the Torah from Sabbath to Sabbath was a consecutive progression through the scroll. The reading of the prophets was ordinarily a passage that in some way mirrored the language of the content of the reading from the Torah. The teaching was typically an expansion through sometimes tangible or of that day's scripture readings. The writings of the apostles provide the earliest evidence for the three-part synagogue service. In Yeshua's Sabbath day visit to the Nazareth synagogue, he also participated in all three aspects of his service. So one, the Torah. So we read this from Luke chapter 4, verse 16, where it says, he entered the synagogue on the Sabbath and stood up to read the Torah. Now, some translations would say the law. Now, the phrase he stood up to read is idiomatic for reading Torah. The reading of the Haftorah always reruns the last few verses of the Torah portion before turning his attention to the reading from the prophets. Now, the second one we're going to look at is the Haftorah, where it says, the scroll of the prophet Isaiah was handed to him, and he opened the scroll and found the place where it is written, all right, in Luke 4:17. This is the Haftorah portion, meaning this is the prophet section where he is now going to read. And then finally, the third one that we have is the Darash, or the Drash for short, where it says, he closed the book, gave it back to the attendant, and sat down, and all the eyes in the synagogue were fixed on him, and he began to say to them, right now, and that was recorded in Luke 4:20. Now, as we can see from start to finish in Luke chapter 4, verse 16, all the way through 21, it is describing the three-phase step that Yeshua himself would have done. He would have started off with the Torah, then he would have moved on to the Haftorah, and then he would have finished with his Drash. Now, Paul's visit to the Galatian synagogue in Pisidian Antioch in Acts 13:15 demonstrates the same three-part order of the service. So for one, after the reading of the law and the prophets, the synagogue officials sent to them, saying, brethren, if you have any words of exhortation for the people, say it. So here we see the same thing, just as in Yeshua's time, as it's recorded in the book of Luke, we see the same thing here recorded in the book of Acts. Now, the three-part synagogue service reflects the three levels of authority and three modes of religious instruction in Judaism. The Torah of Moses is the foundation of the highest level of authority in Judaism because it is the prime revelation. Moses was the greatest of the prophets. God spoke to Moses, quote, mouth to mouth, even openly, and not in dark sayings. And we see this in Numbers chapter 12, verse 8. God spoke to all other prophets only in visions and in dreams. Therefore, Judaism regards the rest of the Bible as subordinate to the Torah. The teaching of the rabbis and the sages is subordinate to both the authority of the Torah and that of the prophets. Now, during the apostolic era and the messianic era, synagogues in the land of Israel read the Torah on a 3-year cycle, right? The 3-year cycle divided the Torah into approximately 154 Torah portions. The Masoretic divisions of the text of the Torah, called the Sedarim, in Numbers 15:4. Many scholars believe that each division marks out the ancient Torah portions of the triennial cycle. Each Torah portion had an accompanying Haftorah portion. No complete list of the triennial Torah portions or Haftorah portions has surrounded, but partial lists are extant in the Genzia discoveries. Now, ancient rabbi sources like the Midrash Rabbah also allow the reconstruction of other parts of the lectionary. As we see, this is quoted from Jacob Mann from the Bible as read and preached in the Old Synagogue, Volume 1. Please go check that out. Now, on the triennial cycle, the average Torah portion was ideally 21 verses long to provide for the prescribed minimum of 3 verses for each of the 7 readers called up to the Torah on a Sabbath. To reflect the weekly Torah portion, the triennial cycle's Haftarah readings were also 21 verses, but could apparently be shortened if a long sermon was anticipated. Now, the annual cycle in use today originated in the Babylonian synagogues. After the destruction of Jerusalem, the Babylonian schools began to exercise increasingly authority over the synagogues of the diaspora. As a result, the Babylonian Jewish annual cycle eventually replaced the Judean and the Galilean triennial cycle. Now, Judaism divides the Hebrew Bible into 3 major classifications, as I described earlier. So, for one, we have the Torah, which is the Law of Moses, which is the first 5 books. We have the Nevi'im, the prophets, and then we have the Ketuvim, which is the writings. And again, Yeshua makes mention of the threefold division in Luke 24:44. Now, the sages selected the Haftarah portions from the books of the prophets. Books of the Bible regarded as writings are not used for the Haftarah portions. However, the Jewish community considered historical books like Joshua, Judges, 1st and 2nd Samuel, and 1st and 2nd Kings to be prophetic books because they were originally authored by the prophetic schools. These historical works are collectively referred to as the former prophets, whereas books of prophecy proper as referred to as later prophets. The chart on the adjacent page compares to the layout of the Christian Old Testament against that of the Hebrew Bible of the Jewish community. Though the former prophets are historical books, those books view the history of Israel through the lens of God's prophetic revelation. They provide insights into God's motive and movement in the affairs of men. Now, the exact meaning of the word Haftorah is not entirely certain. The Haftorah does not mean half of the Torah, as some English speakers may assume. Some sources suggest it means to take leave of. That is, taking leave of the scripture reading because of the Haftorah is the last scripture read in a synagogue service. We know that the Haftorah is a nominal form built on the Hilef stem of Patar. Hilef to discard or dismiss, hence is to recite before dismissal or to conclude the reading of the law by reading a portion of the prophets to read Haftorah. Others suggest that it means conclusion, indicating that the reading of the prophets concludes the public reading in the synagogue. Now, also uncertain is the origin of the custom of reading the Haftarah on the Sabbath. A medieval legend suggests that the practice began during the persecution under Antioch Epiphanes IV, which preceded the Maccabean revolt in 165 BCE. According to this legend, Antiochus prohibited the Jewish people from studying Torah. They compensated by creating a reading cycle, a passage from the prophets, which mirrored the weekly Torah portions. Now, since the law did not forbid the study of the prophets, and thereby kept the letter of the king's prohibition while learning Torah. Now, although the legend enjoys popular support, it has no historical document and probably an apocryphal explanation. Now, the earliest rabbinic reference to a fixed Torah reading cycle with a prescribed list of Haftarah readings is found in Tosefta Megillah 3:1 through 10, which mentions the Haftarah for 4 special Shabbats. The Talmud also prescribes various Haftarah. Although the Haftarah for the weekly Sabbaths are not listed, a parallel passage in the Mishnah provides further evidence for the existence of a continuous reading cycle of the Torah and Haftarah portions in the era of Megillah, which is the Mishnah 3:4 through 5, is a list of Torah and Haftarah readings for special occasions which disrupt the reading cycle. Also, you can look at Mishnah Megillah 4:1 through 2. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the entire Torah portion. Now, as the Torah portion, it's so important because just as We have already established that God spoke mouth to mouth to Moses. So the Torah is the foundation, and what is built off the foundation is the Nevi'im, the prophets, and the Ketuvim, the writings. And now, as Messianic believers, we have what's known as the Brit Hadashah, or the New Covenant, also known as the New Testament. And the Gospels are built on top of the prophets, and Paul's letters also come from there. So the reason why these Torah readings are so important, because us as new believers and or ones who have been in the faith for a very long time, it's important to have a solid foundation. Interesting enough, Yeshua himself gave an illustration on someone who builds their house on sand versus rock. If you build your house on rock, you have a solid foundation and it will stand for a while. Just with us, it is very important for us to know the Torah, to constantly be reading it over and over and over again, so that we have our firm understanding, and then from there we can grow and branch off. So I hope you enjoyed this teaching. Please like, share, subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Shalom.